Hello and welcome back to another Monster Monday, a series where I draw a creature from D&D and I talk about its lore and its history and what it's like to fight in-game. Today's suggestion comes in from Rappeltech over on Twitch. He's a streamer on Twitch and he's asked to see Pixies. So what are Pixies? Well, in D&D they're described as tiny fey creatures, barely a foot tall, according to 5th edition, although in 1977's Monster Manual, when they were first introduced, they were said to be 2.5 feet in height. Larger still, in Cornish mythology, Cornwall here in the UK, where these creatures are believed to have originated, or at least where their folklore is most influential, they are said to be very similar to children in height and appearance. In D&D, however, they're said to resemble diminutive elves with gossamer wings like those of a dragonfly or butterflies, quoting from the Monster Manual. They're said to be very attuned to nature, which is why I'm taking such liberties with the illustration here. Didn't like the idea of drawing them purely as a child, so I've gone very nature-themed with it. They're always likened and connected in some way to nature and animals, plants, everything natural. They're supposed to be as curious as cats and shy as deer. They dress and carry leaves and other pieces of found foliage and animal pelts that they can use to cover themselves. And they can cause plants to bloom or frost to grow in beautiful patterns at their mere touch. They're neutrally good aligned and a complete pacifist. They'd always rather flee from combat than fight. They're highly emotional and childlike in their excitement. If they see a new creature, they're often desperate to introduce themselves, but are scared of humanoid creatures as well, and often try to restrain their excitement and keep at a distance to observe someone wandering through their forests or their lands that they call home. Usually they'll turn themselves invisible using their superior invisibility ability, which ends only when concentration is broken. It also turns anything that they're carrying or wearing invisible as well. And they'll sit between the trees and watch travelling adventurers with curiosity. Sometimes the only way to tell that you're being watched by a fairy or a pixie is the occasional giggle or song heard through the bushes. Sometimes, however, they can't resist interacting with travellers though, and they'll play little tricks and pranks on the object of their obsession, like swapping the party's items into each other's bags, or tying their shoelaces together, maybe painting their faces while they sleep, and so on. And although they are normally very cheeky creatures, they probably find this really fun. They're also doing it for a very serious reason. They do this kind of stuff to gauge the temperaments and attitudes of the people that they're going to meet before they reveal themselves. For example, if they tie the barbarians' shoelaces together and they go absolutely into a rage and start smashing up nearby tents, trying to figure out who did it, that's a good warning sign to a pixie to not introduce themselves because they're liable to get hurt. They are pranksters even once they've revealed themselves. They don't want to invoke the ire of that barbarian. Pixies are this timid and cautious against their nature because they are generally hunted in the worlds of D&D. Wizards and alchemists often capture and cage pixies to harvest their dust. Pixie dust leaves a glittering trail behind flying pixies. It is the only component they need to cast their powerful magic. Although they're only 1/4 challenge rating as a creature, they can cast druidcraft, confusion, dancing lights, detect evil and good, detect thoughts, dispel magic, entangle, fly, phantasmal force, polymorph, and sleep. They have a lot of spells in their repertoire, and this is most likely to counteract the fact that they have absolutely no combat capabilities. We know that they're pacifists and they don't like to fight, but potentially a DM could roll using the strength stat and throw a punch as a pixie if they so wanted, but there's no multi-attack, there's no charge, there's no ram, there's no gore, they have no special abilities related to combat, but they do have all of these spells. And the only thing they need to do to cast these spells is to pluck some of their own pixie dust and use it as a casting component. It's possible that spellcasters try to harvest some of this dust after capturing a pixie to cast spells, or brew potions. Perhaps they even use it to try and discover the secrets of making an invisibility cloak or something like that to naturally attain a pixie's innate invisibility skills. But this pixie dust that so many people want to get their hands on may have been inspired by Peter Pan's Tinkerbell, who is a fairy and uses fairy dust to help people fly or make them fall asleep, things like that. It's also possibly derived from the thin dust, this kind of powdery dust that covers butterfly and moth wings. If you've ever touched a butterfly or a moth, maybe accidentally touching their wings, grazing their wings a little bit, you may have found dust on your fingers, this kind of powdery dust. And this powder is actually a cluster of absolutely minuscule scales, sometimes called hairs, cover butterfly wings and grant them their beautiful patterns and also trap air and help them to fly. Even the most mundane, boring, beige magnolia-looking moth has very intricate patterns laid out in these scales all over their wings. We may not be able to see them, but if you could see in ultraviolet light, you might be able to see these very exotic patterns all over them. And the slightest graze from a finger, perhaps even if you've accidentally picked them up by the wings, you'll notice that this pattern is removed a little bit and you end up with all this dust all over your fingers. I don't know about you, but I was always told as a child that if you were to touch a butterfly's wings, they'd never be able to fly again if this dust came off. More likely a cautionary tale to kids, because kids don't often know their own strength. Might accidentally crush a butterfly if they don't know to leave them alone. Don't worry, if you've ever felt horrified at yourself if you were told the same story, butterflies are a bit more resistant than that, they're a bit more durable than that. Butterflies have been documented flying all the way from the Americas to Europe and beyond. It'll be a bit rubbish if a child's finger strength could completely permanently remove their ability to fly. After all, they're going to be buffeted by really strong winds on those travels, and if getting in a strong breeze meant that they immediately plummeted to the ground and could never fly again, the species would not have continued very far, would it? So although removing this dust does inhibit their ability to fly temporarily, butterflies and moths shed these scales and regrow them fairly regularly. So if you do ever accidentally touch a butterfly's wings, then just give it a few minutes, give it a little bit of time, and eventually these scales will regrow. But these scales aren't the wings themselves, the wings are underneath. If you've ever seen a butterfly emerge from a chrysalis, the first thing that they do is they take a little while to pump blood, like hydraulics, into their wings. They're all furled up and curled. They pump them into tons and tons of blood vessels that lie all the way through these wings till they're taut and stretched out. There's only a thin membrane which ties all of these blood vessels together, but the scales grow on top of that. Now, I've mentioned before that pixies are tied to Cornwall and Cornish mythology, but there's actually a lot of mystery and debate surrounding their origin. Devon and Cornwall, southwestern England, absolutely beautiful place if you're not from the UK, or maybe you're from the north and you're looking to go on a holiday. You're looking for a holiday to the UK, definitely make Devon or Cornwall part of your journey. They are absolutely stunning places to visit, all very seaside-y, all very rural, beautiful, natural environments. They have incredibly strong ties to pixies. In a lot of the shops on most of the streets, you will find paintings and statues, miniatures, books, everything about pixies and fairies. They even celebrate Pixie Day, a tradition where pixies are believed to roam through the cities and the towns in the southwest, and they need to be driven away using bells, because they are troublemakers naturally. However, no one's completely sure where the name came from. A lot of people believe it's derived from the Swedish Pyske, Pyske, meaning little fairy. And we know that in some Scandinavian countries, belief or at least tradition surrounding pixies and fairies is still fairly strong. Like certain roads will not get built in Scandinavian countries because it's believed that they travel through fairy lands and that would disrupt their lives, or at the very least, it's tradition to not build in those areas because of pixies. But some say that the name is related to Scotland. First ruler of Scotland was a man by the name of Kenneth MacAlpin, who sounds more like a corduroy-clad supply teacher than he does a fierce barbarian, but he was the ruler of a barbarian clan called the Pixie. Before Scotland was united under his rule, there was a lot of different clans that all had various different areas of Scotland that they called home. But Kenneth's clan, the Picts, were named by invading Romans, who saw these people who were tattooed from head to toe and who would ambush their forces from between the trees in forests, constantly watching them. These savage guerrilla warriors who would rise up from fields and take out well-trained Roman centurions using the act of surprise, these kind of pagan or druidic believing people covered in tattoos. If you think of the blue face paint in Braveheart, it's kind of what the Pictish had, except it wasn't face paint, they were tattoos. They weren't just on their faces, they were absolutely everywhere. and instead that the Picts existed between the 300s and the 800s AD rather than the 1300s where William Wallace Braveheart was supposed to happen. So one little factual inaccuracy among the legions of them in the Braveheart film. But the Romans saw these terrifying people, saw Kenneth MacAlpin's people, and called them the Painted Men. Painted was Pict in their language, so they became the Pictish. Pictish, Pixie. I can certainly see with their connection to nature, these kind of like forest-dwelling people watching you always, called the Picts. I can see Pixie coming from that, but I do think it's unlikely, certainly compared to the Scandinavian ties, which seem a little bit stronger. That said, the Scottish do have ties to the fairy wilds though, the fairy lands. In the centre of Edinburgh, where I live, there are two hills or mountains, depending on how generous you want to be. One of them is called Calton Hill, the other one is Arthur's Seat. They're both said to be gateways to the fairy worlds. The dead were often buried in the side of these hills, grant them access to some kind of afterlife, and they were believed to have their bodies watched over by pixies. On top of that, on Calton Hill in specific, we know that there's a very pervasive story about a ghost boy, a drummer boy. Apparently you're supposed to be able to hear at night. It's very similar to a pixie, again often depicted as a child, who would play music and sing. Maybe have a little dance. So maybe the drummer boy of Calton Hill is actually a pixie, who knows? But belief in pixies is believed to have predated Christianity in Britain. The stories of pixies were often adapted after widespread Christianity and Christian belief took hold of Britain. When these stories were adapted to fit Christian beliefs, it was said that pixies were the unbaptized children who had died. And rather than haunting people like ghosts, because they were children, they still had childlike temperaments, they would play pranks and tricks instead. Clothes were often burned, and as a result they would need to find natural things to cover themselves in the afterlife. But pixies even made it into some of the world's most enduring stories. In the Cornish dialect, pixie used to be pronounced and spelled Pixies, Pigsies. Believed that the story of the three little pigs actually featured Pixies rather than pigs. It was only after a dialect shift and subsequent retellings of the story that resulted in the version that we now all know. Anyway guys, thank you so much for joining me for this one. I really enjoyed researching it and drawing this one. Had absolutely tons of fun. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a little thumbs up, a little like down below. Maybe favourite this and share it with the pixie of your party. All of that massively helps the channel to grow, so thank you very much for that. If you particularly love this drawing and you'd like to support the channel even more, you can head over to Patreon, where one of the reward levels is to get a print of this drawing and all the other Monster Mondays that I do this month. And at certain levels as well, you could get a commission drawing from me of whatever you'd like. D&D character of your choice, maybe another character from a different story perhaps, maybe even more pixies, who knows. So if you'd like to give me a little tip for making these videos, also earn some rewards for yourself, more drawings and things like that, then head over to Patreon. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining me. Happy monster hunting, and until next time, I will see you later.